Domestic violence calls are one of the most difficult calls an officer can respond to because they go into a situation where folks have relationship problems, marital problems that maybe have been festering for a very long time, and the officer is expected to assess the situation and respond to it in a short period of time, not having the information and all the knowledge of these people's relationships. And so oftentimes what you can have is the parties turn against the officer, and now the officer is in a situation where he or she may have to protect themselves against the individuals that called for help to begin with. Here in Santa Ana and really throughout the state of California, domestic violence is taken very seriously. There are laws that mandate an arrest by an officer going to a domestic violence call. Regardless if it's a felony domestic violence where there's injury to one of the parties involved, or it's a misdemeanor domestic violence, in both of those cases it's mandatory arrest. So the officer will take somebody into custody, and really they're looking at who is the primary aggressor in the situation. Oftentimes we get domestic violence calls where it's a verbal dispute, and we'll respond to the scene, and if there is no crime that has been committed that the officer can identify, what we do is document it as a domestic violence information report. So at least we document that we went out for domestic violence. However, once the officers arrived, they did not see or have any information to suggest a crime was committed. So in those cases, we do not arrest anyone since there's no crime that's identified.
Although I can't prove it, it is my understanding that close to the time perhaps that Keisha was murdered, she may have actually told her husband that this was it, that she was leaving, and that may have been, I don't know, the impetus for him doing what happened. I don't know that for sure, but based on what we know about domestic violence and about when the perpetrator takes that ultimate last step, that there's a good reason for it in his or her mind. And so that may have well been what happened to Keisha. Why is Keisha a focal point of domestic violence, or a clothing drive, or a tree planted in her honor? One thing is that her life was cut short. That much we know. It's just inconceivable that someone that young dies, and that someone that young dies at the hands of another. So it's hard for us to imagine that. And in order to keep a legacy alive, there was a choice made by students of the Communication Studies Club at Santa Ana College to acknowledge her by a clothing drive. And the first time we had the clothing drive, it was a 1 week or 2 weeks, a 2 week long event, and it grew to a month long, and it grew exponentially. It was absolutely incredible, the turnout we had. But it actually is connected in terms of understanding the importance Keisha had, the understanding of our desire to remember her, and this is where the cranes come in, the 1,000 cranes. It comes from a true story in Japan that a young girl was sickened by radiation poisoning, of course, from atomic war. And it was said that if a person could fold 1,000 cranes, they would get their wish. And this young girl in Japan was busy folding cranes, and she died before she could fold her 1,000. But her friends and her family finished folding them for her. And so, in memory of Keisha, we looked at being able to have 1,000 cranes. And tucked away inside the wings of some of the early cranes that we strung are the names of people that people wanted to honor and hold in their memory. So some of our cranes actually have names on their inside wings of people who were victims of domestic violence or perhaps something else that took them away from being able to reach their 1,000th crane, taking them away from reaching their dream. And so that's why we're honoring Keisha with 1,000 cranes. She could not finish her dream. It's up to us to do it for her.